Hi, everybody. This is Andrew Cuneo, and today I'm joined again by Matt Sperling, who is back. And this time we're going to be talking about some of the new Streets of New Capenna spoilers or previews that have come out. And I thought rather than doing a top five list, we would try to hit on some of the cards that maybe haven't gotten quite as much hype, but are still maybe going to show up in standard. I do think there's a couple of really obvious choices for the top five list, which is why I didn't want to
Yeah.
just make a top five. So I've been brewing some decks, and I know Matt, you've gone through the spoilers some, and I would say the card that's gotten most of the hype is Nixilis the Adversary. So what's your initial impressions of this one?
Yeah, I think this is getting hyped for a really good reason. It seems like a pretty nasty effect for 3 mana. We've seen in the past that if the planeswalker you're putting out for 3 mana creates a sub game or multiple sub games potentially with this one, where now the opponent feels like they're under some kind of pressure to interact with it or remove it, or there's going to be some kind of snowballing advantage. That puts the opponent under a lot of pressure for 3 mana, right? And I don't think this card is Oko, but it has the potential to do something to the effect of I've invested 3 mana, and now my opponent is sort of scrambling to figure out what to do. And and if you make two copies of a planeswalker and potentially two copies of a planeswalker and a 1/1, it's gonna be really hard to answer that with one card. Now, of course, you've put a card in, right? I mean, it requires something that Oko didn't require and other planeswalkers haven't required, which is sacrificing creature. But these black decks in standard right now are more than equipped to sacrifice a creature, so that doesn't seem to be an issue. It has other modes, like you can sacrifice it if you do have something that's 6 or 7 power lying around. You can threaten the ultimate either immediately or in the very near future because the copy could come in with such high loyalty that, let's say you had that 6/4 menace that has like a drawback when it attacks, they can maze with it. If you had that thing sitting around, I can imagine things playing out even better than just the scenario that everyone thought of first, which was you sack a dork and get a couple of planeswalkers. So the more I read this card and think about how it's going to play out, the more I think we're going to be impressed with how powerful it is. It has like a classic sort of Punisher mechanic where the opponent can pay the life or the card based on what resource they need less, and that's not great. But if the rate's good enough and it's happening over and over again, then the opponent eventually has to make some choices that will cost them. So I don't know. I'm kind of buying into the hype on this one. Where did you land in your sort of initial review on that?
I think that it's almost definitely overhyped. Which so just starting out, I think that this card is just really hard to evaluate. Never having played with it, I think that it's. I mean, we've played with 3 mana planeswalkers before, but this idea that you've got a 3 mana planeswalker that's going to come into play with a second copy of itself, that's certainly new. And I think that everyone will have a much better feel for this card once they get to play with it for a day. But I do think that just Wizards has gotten smarter and less aggressive, I think, in how they're pushing cards after their experience with Oko. So I think at a minimum, they will have definitely
Hmm.
tested this card a lot. We're not going to have a repeat of the experience with Oko where Oko came out and was completely ridiculous, and someone in R&D said, well, we never even tried using the turn your opponent's stuff into an elk ability because we thought that people wouldn't even do that, and that was like one of the most miserable parts of the card. So I think this card is going to be better play tested than the really broken stuff of 2 or 3 years ago, like Oko or Omnath, which makes me feel like it's probably not going to be just incredibly good. Like I don't think we're not gonna play with this card for a day and say, wow, this is so overpowered. How did this ever see print? It's gonna have to be banned immediately. I think it's really just gonna be an issue of does it wind up as like a four of in a really popular Rakdos deck, or is it maybe just a little bit more of a fringe, like your Rakdos deck wants it, but maybe not 4 copies, or maybe you have a couple
Yeah.
copies in the sideboard. I think we're looking at something more at that level, not a just omnipresent, completely format warping card.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, Oko. Maybe it's probably the wrong bar to set for any new card.
Yeah.
Like the, the best card that's come out in the last 10 years, or whatever. But okay, take a step back from that. There's a lot of room between Oko and best card in the format. Even, I mean, there's wiggle room there. I think it has the potential to. I think we could eventually end up regarding it as broken. I think it certainly could end up so strong that it has a particular potency against control. I think it might like single-handedly make it so you can't play control. It was already hard to play control in standard, because for a number of reasons, but mainly that the mid-range strategies generate so much advantage, and the control decks didn't have something like Topiary 5 to generate advantage even better. The control was already sort of in a tough spot. I don't think it was having that much success. But if this thing does what I think it's going to do, that's going to put control in a really tough spot really quickly. So yeah, I mean, I agree. I think Oko is a bar. There's no reason to think any new card is going to be that strong. Oko surprised us with how strong it was, anyways. So I sort of want to set that aside for a second. This thing, if it's not as good as I think it is, maybe it's because at the end of the day, it doesn't necessarily have that big an impact. If the opponent is doing something powerful, proactive, and you're doing this, maybe what they're doing is more powerful, and they can just lose 2 life a couple times, and you're not beating a chariot or a Goldspan Dragon or whatever they're doing. It's possible it plays out that way. It's just not my prediction based on the rate you're getting here. I think if you're ever ahead or at par, the opponent's life total is going to get pressured really quickly.
Yeah, I get my other caveat on this card is definitely that you're banking a lot on the Punisher mechanic of the card. The +1 ability. And I think that there are going to be decks in Standard that can pretty comfortably just afford to let you drain them, for 6 life, and they're still going to win the game anyway. So I think that once we see this card play out, we're going to realize that it's not good in all circumstances. Like, it's not really going to help you that much if you're behind on board and you're looking at playing it on like turn 5 or something. In a game where you're behind in a Seeker's Chariot, or you think your opponent's about to cast a Goldspan Dragon or whatever. But it is going to be a really good card when you have the good draw where you get to play it with Casualty on turn 3, especially on the play. I think that is going to be kind of oppressively good. But I think it's really going to fall off later on in the game. But let's move on to, I think, one of the other set of cards, which is just they're not triomes this time, but they're the new cycling tri-lands. And like, these are obviously going to be good. You're obviously going to play them if you're playing that 3-color combination, you're just going to have 4 of them in the deck. I thought that the more interesting thing is, do you think this is going to lead to people playing more than 3 colors? Like, do you think we're going to see 4 and 5-color decks because of these?
I saw a couple cards in the spoiler that at least purport to pay you off for being able to pay 1 of every color mana. I didn't see any of those aimed at a power level like of a Niv Mizzet, the 5-color Niv Mizzet. So I think that to me is what drives. When you have these in the format in conjunction with some other lands, you're probably not constrained like that you can't play the 5-color deck. What's the reward for doing so?
Yeah.
I have to confess I haven't done that, that Scryfall, that Gatherer search to find out what the payoffs are, but they don't spring to mind as super compelling. And like the spoiler that I did see, where I saw a couple cards was like make a treasure, and oh, by the way, you can cash in 1 of every to do this or that. Those didn't seem like the right rewards to chase. Have you looked at that? Do you know sort of like what you would put in that 5-color deck that made it so like, okay, well now here I am on turn 5 and 1 of every color. Now I get to do blank.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything like that. I think it would be more just if you somehow felt like you you weren't getting enough powerful cards in like your 3-color decks, so you wanted to go into a 4th color. And I don't think that's going to be a problem either. I think that pretty much any 3-color combination, you're going to feel comfortable that you've got access to like all the 3 and 4 and 5 mana plays you would want. So I don't think we're going to see 4 and 5 color decks, but maybe this is the last set that's going into standard before there's a rotation. Like maybe when we drop from 8 sets down to 5 sets, people will feel more like, okay, now I'm really actually improving my card quality by going beyond 3 colors. But I think for now they're going to be really good in the appropriate 3-color deck, and there's not really much more to say about them.
Yeah, it's like we're getting tunnel vision here, but I can imagine, like, what if I take my Naya deck, my Naya tokens, I really want to have up Nixilis in it, and I go, okay, well, what would it take to get this black splash going in my Naya deck instead of being a Jund deck? And it's like, yeah, like, I mean, I can imagine that happening, but every time I sit down to build a deck in this format, there's so many powerful cards, like, I can't even play all the the red and 6s I want, right? Or if I'm blue-red, I can't play all the, dragons and copy spells. I can't even fit it all in. So I don't find myself needing to reach outside the toolbox. I'm already like, man, I wish I could play 90 cards. I wish Yorion was around,
Yeah.
So that's, again, maybe this is the 8th set in standard. Maybe that's just where we are at this moment in time.
Yeah. All right, so this is the first card that you pulled out of spoiler, Depopulate, which is, it's basically Wrath of God, but if either person has a multicolored card, they get to draw a card. So what is it that appeals to you about this card or makes you think it's interesting?
Last time we saw this card what was called Something the City, where you got to do the same thing, but instead of multicolored creature, it was creature with power 4 or greater. The card impressed me, right? Like it was better than I thought it was going to be, because just having the sweeper be the right cost is actually more important than giving the aggressive player you're playing against, who presumably you're happy to wrath against, the extra card. So that was one thing. The thing is, I think this standard format has really been going in a direction where removal is really good, and people are going wide and really interested in token strategies. Like some of the most popular cards, if not by the numbers, certainly by the sentiments, are like, Wedding Announcement, the Anvil, the 1/1 that gives a +1/+1 counter at the beginning of every combat. I don't know why that name is escaping me. I've probably cast that card 1,000 times. The Aspirant.
Yeah, the Luminarch Aspirant.
The Luminarch Aspirant. So these different cards that they're not like, hey, invest a bunch in this one body, because I think the removal is pretty good. But so then when you have a good Wrath, you can sort of potentially, as the control player, or even like some kinds of mid-range player, you can try to push back against that. Because, hey, if you're going to go wide with this Kiki Jiki saga and this, this Wedding Announcement and all the stuff we've been seeing, then I have an ability for 4 mana to rein that in. So it was interesting to me. I think it does show up to me as more powerful potentially than Doomscar. In a vacuum, I mean, Doomscar is like around the same power level, but in practice, that mana you shave, again, I've been in the past sort of finding myself like, well, I'm glad I have at least a couple of copies of the one that's at 4. Now my opponent has a real tough time, getting under those wraths. That was my first impression.
Yeah, I think that for the most part, all the sweepers are in a pretty bad spot in standard, especially the sweepers that don't hit planeswalkers. Like, I think Burn Down the House maybe has a place, but I think realistically all the white sweepers are just massively worse than Meat Hook Massacre.
Yeah.
So I think that, maybe you're not playing black and white together in your deck, but I think that most of the decks that sweeper like Depopulate would be good against are just going to be so bad against Meat Hook Massacre that they're not going to succeed, or they're not going to be so one-dimensional that a sweeper really warps your game plan around them. So this one, I'm not expecting this to be a big player in standard, and I think that it's debatable whether or not it's better than Doomscar, and Doomscar, as far as I can tell, isn't a particularly popular card right now either.
Yeah, it's really hard. I mean, think about Chariot. maybe a chariot got banned. I mean, there's a lot of those types of threats. Yeah, I hear you. I think this isn't like the savior to blue eye control. Just I think if you decided I'm gonna try blue eye control, I wouldn't be surprised to see a couple copies of this show up.
Yeah. All right. Next card, Extraction Specialist. So this is white and 2 for a 3/2 lifelink, and when it comes into play, you return a CMC 2 or less card to the battlefield, but that card can't attack or block for as long as you control Extraction Specialist. So what were you thinking about as something you want to do with this one?
So yeah, just thinking about like the power level of some of the white creatures that don't need to necessarily attack or block to have an impact, and then the overall rate if this thing goes off. So like in particular, I think Luminarch Aspirant is Luminarch Aspirant, Intrepid Adversary, Thalia. There are some creatures that are at a really good rate. Like, I mean, like almost like a historically good rate that have made like White Weenie and similar strategies playable in standard. And yeah, 3/2 lifelink for 3, obviously like that's behind on rate, but if you tack on one of those creatures that you can't attack right away, it's actually I think a significant amount of value in excess of what you'd expect to get for 3 mana. Not only that, but cards like Intrepid Adversary and Luminarch Aspirant also tend to die more than their fair share relative to other things you might be spending 2 mana on. So I wouldn't be that surprised to find one of those creatures in my graveyard as early as turn 3. Not always the case. If you play some 2 mana 2/2, it's often hard. You may find that in your graveyard they shocked it, but not. But I think people are likely to interact in combat with your 3/1 lifelink. They're likely to just interact with removal or combat with your aspirant. And this thing's going to come down, and I think, if it's early and you're getting back that aspirant, maybe you're presenting a board that now it's just sort of like a lot of value for not that much mana. If it's something, and later in the game, that's when you have the opportunity to pull something back, like an adversary, and maybe pump up your squad or something. So I thought this was a pretty good rate for what you're getting, and in particular, right now in standard, you have some creatures that I can imagine wanting to get back.
I agree with what you said about. I mean, there are good things to get back with it, and it's a pretty good rate in terms of mana. I think that this card is not going to line up very well against what are the more popular strategies right now in standard. Like I was looking at a bunch of the most recent standard metagame challenges on Magic Online, and almost every deck just has multiple Meathook Massacres in it, which this card is not very good against Meathook Massacre. And the most popular removal spell is Vanishing Verse, which exiles. Which that I didn't bring that up when we were talking about Ob Nixilis. I think that the printing of Ob Nixilis might actually change that though, where Vanishing Verse is no longer just sort of the removal spell of choice, and then
Well, there's a give and take there. I think the ability of the shield counter still will make maybe not that exile effect,
yeah,
but I think exile effects will still be at a premium because of that ability. But
yeah,
there's a give and take there. But yeah, it's a totally valid point. Sometimes your creature dies, but it doesn't actually die.
yeah. So I mean, this is certainly it's a good enough card just in a vacuum. I'm just not sure that it's gonna actually do what the format is asking you to do.
Yeah, totally fair.
This is one that I was interested in, Sanctuary Warden. So 6-drop for 5/5 Angel, and it comes into play with 2 shield counters, which shield counters are, I think, one of the better kind of new mechanics for constructed. So they make it's kind of like regenerating, but you can burn through a shield counter just by dealing like a single damage to the creature, but it makes it so it saves it sort of for the first thing. And then when it comes into play, when it enters the battlefield or attacks, you can remove a counter from a creature or a planeswalker you control. If you do, you draw a card and you get a 1/1 green and white citizen token. So you can just play this and immediately cash in one of your shield counters to get a 1/1 token and draw a card. So this is kind of 6 mana 5/5 draw card that then also has this additional resiliency of the shield counter.
Yeah, there's a famous test. There's a famous test for creatures that cost 5 or 6 mana. It better be very, very, very tough to kill or provide some immediate value. and this has a little of both. That's that's attractive.
Yeah, I'm not sure like exactly what kind of deck wants this, but I do think that this is good enough on rate that as a 6 mana card, it's reasonable.
Yeah, I think I didn't have it on my list of my most interesting cards. I think just I have to sort of be blown away at when the mana cost gets up to 6 and 7, and I think this is doing some interesting things. The fact that you get it when you attack or enters the battlefield means it can, in some board states where you have counters to continuously remove, it can take on that sort of like Titan type of effect. The Titan cycle, the Grave Titan, the Sun Titan would be the white one, where you get some immediate value. Even if they kill it, you're up card advantage potentially, and if they don't kill it, you sort of take over the game. Draw a card and create a 1/1 isn't as backbreaking as an effect as some other Titans have had. So that's where I sort of stopped short. I thought about maybe you cast this. Does the opponent have to interact with it or do they die? I don't know. I don't know if they do, but it has potential.
Yeah, it does. It is going to have the upside that you are going to have, at least a shield counter on it
Yeah.
when it comes into play. So depending on what removal is being played, if your opponent can't just kill it with, one spell, then it's going to be a lot more appealing.
And the shield counter prevents destruction and damage, but not exile, not minus X, right?
Not sacrifice.
Not sacrifice. So I predicted it when we were talking about the last card. I sort of predicted that effects that exile and effects like the Soul Shatter effect, which is on one of the charms, as
Yeah.
it turns out. I think that effect actually goes up in value. I mean, you have Goldspan Dragon as already sort of like one of the banner wielding creatures of the format that sort of defines at least an archetype, maybe more. If you think about it's used in Naya, Blue Red, that card already sort of has that dynamic to it. And then if you end up introducing a couple constructed playable shield cards, which maybe you do in the set, we'll have to see how it plays out. Then certainly you're going to want to reach for a card like a Soul Shatter more than a Doomblade. Potentially, you have to at least consider it. There's also one of the charm type, or not charm, but one of the multicolor cards for 3 mana, exiles and can't be countered. And, stuff like that. Anyways, my point is, this stuff doesn't exist in a vacuum, and so to the extent that other shield cards are playable, it probably reduces the value of this because then people are more prepared. To the extent that none of the shield cards make a splash, then okay, this is more likely to catch somebody off guard and that their removal doesn't work.
Yeah. I think this is one to keep an eye on, but if I had to guess, it's not going to line up quite right for the format. Mm-hmm. All right, I don't know if you've looked at this Planeswalker. This one also kind of was interesting to me. It's a 5 mana Planeswalker, 5 loyalty. The +1 ability, you make one of your creatures slightly better. The -3, I think, is the what's going to make or break the card. So you look at the top 7 cards of your library. You can put a permanent with mana value 3 or less from among them onto the battlefield, and it comes into play with a shield counter. And then it does have an ultimate -7, make 5 3/3 angels, which that'll probably win you the game on a lot of boards. So this doesn't seem awful on rate to me.
No.
I do think that it really does not compare favorably to the Wandering Emperor, is one issue with it. But if you're looking for more Planeswalkers in white, I mean, maybe you would turn to this. Does this interest you at all as a card to try?
Yeah, I definitely. I'm not interested. I'm interested somewhat. I think it has a couple issues. It's obviously built as a curved topper. I mean, this one even tells you got to put cards, the other permanents that cost 3 or less. I mean, this is these things are always sort of curved toppers when they're these white Planeswalkers that pump up creatures. This one's like really explicit. This is a curved topper for a deck with a bunch of permanents and you can push damage through. I like it. I mean, in that role, if it was mana cheaper, then maybe it's better than Wandering Emperor. But as it stands, you have Thalias in your deck theoretically if you're in that style, in this color. And so now there's an issue there where it's just a lot of mana. So you can't play a lot of them. I would not be surprised at all to see a copy or two in that style of deck, and maybe it ends up playing out okay, because it is kind of nasty if in any kind of board stall or race, because it can give flying or it can give lifelink. It has some of that versatility to do that, to be the right kind of curve topper for that deck. Wouldn't surprise me if that's the case. I don't think it's going to be like blow you away in that
Yeah.
role. There are a couple other cards that like feed on the ability to have counters, and I mean we previewed one a second ago, so it's possible that you're hungry for those counters, because there's another card that chews up counters. I forget what it is, but
Yeah. So,
there's at least a card or two other that do that. So it's got a couple things that are interesting about it. I'm definitely not writing it off, but I'm also not super excited about a curve
yeah.
topper. It's going to be potentially a one or two.
Well, I think that so one thing that is nice about it is that it can hit, wedding announcement, or
Sure.
like maybe theoretically you construct some Esper deck where it hits Kaito or something. So I think it's not just kind of a curve topper in a white weenie deck. I think it might go more in a somewhat different style of
Okay.
deck where you're not just like a bunch of redundant aggressive 3 mana cards. I mean, maybe if you have some 3 mana permanent that's really important to your particular strategy, this is a way to tutor for it, or not tutor, but find it and put
No,
it into
that's
play.
interesting. I hadn't thought about that way, but certainly if I was going to think about that, I think the immediate candidates that spring to mind would be the Kiki Jiki Mirror Saga and the Wedding Announcement. I think like there's 3 mana permanents that have been really powerful and that you might want to dig up because you found a cool synergy with one or more. Yeah, I mean
Yeah.
that makes some sense to me.
Yeah.
It's hard to use the +1 in those decks, so again, you know what I mean. It's like the +1 ability then is going to be a little bit probably underwhelming when you're going wide and you get a chance to put lifelink counter on a creature. Not that impressive, but you'd have to see, obviously the particulars always matter. So
Yeah.
you have to see what else you have going on.
All right, so this next one is one you were interested in, the Undercover Operative. I so this doesn't really appeal to me at all. So what was it that you saw about this card that you thought would maybe make it do something?
Yeah, I thought the clones have been underwhelming for a little while. I thought this had a couple features that made it a little bit interesting. The fact that you can copy stuff wherever it sits on the battlefield, whether you have it or they have it, and then if you do choose your own thing, you get some meaningful protection. Probably not at the rate that's happening right now. I think that it's fair to say that the 4 mana clone is still maybe asking a lot. I don't know. I could think of maybe this could be a role player somewhere, was my thought. Where exactly would I try to play it? I mean, I can imagine it being nice to have a Goldspan Dragon because my opponent has one or something like that. There's obviously a problem with clones. I mean, they're win more if I put this in my deck hoping to clone my own, Chariot or my own, Goldspan Dragon. Well, that sort of presupposes a game state where I'm probably already winning. So this is going to have that same problem. I just it's a card that I would want to try. I like clones, and I think this has a couple features that make it interesting, but probably not going to make it on rate.
Yeah, there is already a 4 mana clone that you can play that has the disturb backside that it will win a really long game if you ever get to disturb it, and I don't think that one's close to being played.
Yeah,
So I think this one's gonna kind of suffer the same fate.
yeah.
This is one that I think we were both interested in, the Tenacious Underdogs. So it's a 3/2 for 2 mana, and it's got this Blitz ability, which is you pay whatever the Blitz cost is, which is here, it's 4 and 2 life. And it makes it so the creature comes into play and has haste, but then it's going to die. You're going to sack it at the beginning of the next end step, and you draw a card. And this card is unique in that you can cast it for its Blitz cost from the graveyard, and notably, it just goes back to the graveyard if you do that. So you could just start doing that, once a turn. So the thing that's interesting to me about this card is the more I thought about it, at first I was like, okay, so this is just a card for like a black beatdown deck. But I think this actually might be more at home in kind of a mid-range deck, where you're gonna, you're a big part of your plan is going to be to play it and just block with it potentially, and you're going to use it to pressure
Yeah.
planeswalkers as the game goes on, or also just if you get to 7 mana, you can just blitz this and then use it for the casualty part of Nixilis potentially. Like I think that this is perhaps not like a 4 of in an aggro deck, but it's more like a 2 of in a more of a mid range deck. But
Yeah,
how were you seeing it?
I'm right there with you, and you touched on the two things that I was going to touch on. Logically, it sort of makes sense that we're all thinking about Nixilis and how to feed that turn 3 Nixilis, and this one's really meaningful because you have a 3 mana creature, a 3 power creature, excuse me, that the opponent's not very incentivized to kill unless they're going to explicitly start playing around the Nixilis, which they might. But if they do, okay, they've killed this creature that has this, that you're not like crying about that. You maybe can just play another creature and then delay Nixilis one turn. Maybe you didn't even have Nixilis, but they spent their turn doomblading your graveyard value creature. So it has that. Nixilis immediately had a lot of people sort of looking at Skyclave Shade. And I think Skyclave Shade is an important card to compare this to. And the fact that this has the ability to block, which is another thing you already mentioned, but I want to go a little deeper on, is actually really, to me, it's really important. Because a 3/2 for 2 is actually in some ways a better blocker than an attacker, right?
Yeah.
As an attacker, it can trade. In constructed, you're trading off with your opponent's 1 mana play or 2 mana play with some value, or they have a 2-mana 2/1 first strike. You can't even attack. Not that impressive, but as a blocker, I think it's a little bit more impressive. But you have that flexibility to do that. It may be fed to an Nixilis. It may be defending an Nixilis. So if you pair Nixilis with Skyclave Shade, it doesn't necessarily do what you're trying to do if you're on the back foot. So anyways, I thought this had a few of those inherent advantages that I want to at least see how it plays out. It's possible. It turns out the blitz ability is kind of expensive, and maybe in today's standard you don't have a million mana. We're not recurring Hammer of Bogarden anymore, right?
Yeah.
You don't have that much mana lying around. It's possible it plays out that way, but I'm leaving some room for me to be impressed on the upside here that you get enough for that 2 mana investment.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think that this card is going to probably surprise people and be better than people are expecting. You mentioned this card, Shakedown Heavy, when we were initially talking about Nixilis, and specifically because it's just such a high power creature, so you can get a copied Nixilis really close to ultimating, which I do think is one of the important uses of this card. But what do you think of this just as like a body to put into a deck? Or do you think that this is at a good enough rate that you'll be happy to cast it?
That sentiment, just that objective of like, let me invest 3 or 4 mana into a black creature or a red creature, or whatever, and it doesn't have haste and it doesn't give me immediate value, and then I'll hope to attack with it the following turn. Even that sort of doesn't always play out when the removal is good. And then this also gives the opponent a choice, so you sort of have that Punisher mechanic. Yeah. Now, obviously, you get a 6/4 menace in exchange for all that trouble you go through. But overall, I think I've been disappointed enough times with the plan of just, again, put 3 at 2 mana. I'm okay. At 3-4 mana, when I need to then untap with it, attack with it, it's a little bit disappointing. Now, that's not always the case. You had the 7/6. What was it? The Ferocidon, not the Ferocidon.
The Rotting Regisaur.
The Rotting Regi. You had the Rotting Regi, which I think is a natural maybe comparison here in terms of oversized body at the cost. That was certainly a powerful card. I'm leaving room to be impressed here, and Nixilis might be the card. That interaction might tip the scales a little bit and give you another way that it just gives your deck another way to play. That's not just like sack a little crappy guy to Nixilis and get a small loyalty planeswalker copy, but instead do something bigger and better. So, I'll leave room to be surprised, but I would be surprised if this ends up being in a tier 1 deck.
So the one thing I would add to that is I think that Rotting Regisaur is like it. In some ways, it's a good comparison, but I think there's a really meaningful difference that this thing only has 4 toughness, which means that red decks can just kill it with Thundering Rebuke if they want to, or a green deck with like Blizzard Brawl is going to kill this really easily. Having this thing get hit by Blizzard Brawl seems like a just absolute disaster.
Those are the types of problems. Those are the types of problems you encounter when you start to invest in the creature that's
Yeah,
expensive
but
and only attacks the blocks. But yeah, so
like Rotting Regisaur was big enough that it actually outsized that stuff, whereas this doesn't, which is I
yeah,
think a really big mark against this card.
yeah, totally fair.
Moving on to the red cards, this is another one you picked, Jaxus the Troublemaker.
Mm.
What was it about this card that it appealed to you? Is it? Are you planning to cast it? Are you planning to blitz it?
Yeah, there were two things that I had on my list of sort of like things that stood out. Um, the first was just like the rate you get with the blitz thing you're doing. It was interesting. You can blitz it for two, copy something for one. You get a card draw when when it dies. You have to discard a card along the way. So you've invested two red and a colorless, and you discarded a card. You get two cards back, and you get whatever value you got from the thing you copied. Maybe you got some enter the battlefield value. Maybe you got some leaves the battlefield value. But that all seems like pretty efficient to me. If you look at a card like that Mirror Breaker, that saga that I've probably mentioned four
Yeah.
times already, but that's been one of the standout cards. It's been one of the impressive standouts from the last set. If you look at that, like that ability to copy something can be sneakily good if you can find some values. Creatures that you already wanted to play. Your red black deck, for example, already wanted to play some creatures that help you out when they die, help you out when they come in. There's a new one in the set. If you're a Grixis deck, you can have the 1/1 flyer that mills two. So I think that blitz interaction is going to be pretty good. And then if you happen to find yourself with 4 mana, I think you can put out a creature that is pretty threatening. I'm looking at the blitz as the primary mode because I'm more assured that I'll get my value that way. Whereas the 4 mana one has the same 4 mana, it's a 4 mana creature I got to untap with to get my value. So that's more of like the backside to me. And to me, the front side is that blitz ability where I can do something with my sort of fiddly red black deck, for example, but actually generate some meaningful value. The fact that it has those modes gives you some. That's kind of what interested me about this one.
This I think it's too much setup. Like you would certainly agree that if you're interested in doing this copying thing, you would always have 4 copies of the Fables of the Mirror Breaker before you went to this one, right?
I think so.
Um, and one thing, it wasn't from the way you were describing it. It wasn't. I don't know that you made it clear that like when you're blitzing it out. So that's you're investing 1 card in blitzing this. Then you're going to have to discard a card to copy whatever it is you're interested in copying. And then both the copy and it are going to die at the end of the turn. So you're going to invest 2 cards. And then you get your 2 cards back, plus you got whatever value you got from the copying. But you are exposing yourself to instant speed removal, certainly, because once you blitz this out, you kind of have to try to do the copying. You can't there's no, you don't have any ability to play around anything. I mean, I guess you could choose to just attack with the 2/3, but
Yeah,
like
but
you're
imagine that you target. Let's say you target your 2 drop with this ability, and the 2 drop is something that when it dies, you mill 2, draw a card. Like if they want to use their instant speed removal, I mean, have you been got at that point? I mean,
yes.
yes, to some extent.
Well, no, I think you have because you're spending 3 mana and 2 cards, and they're removing your 2 drop. Like for assuming that they're not spending more than 3 mana on it, I think you're really coming out very behind on that exchange
Okay.
because you're not going to get like you don't get the copy of the creature if they kill it in response.
You get the card from this when it dies, so you'll get. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's like I'm not saying obviously I don't. I mean, I don't want my creature to die when I activate this ability, but I think it has enough modes. I wouldn't be surprised if this is part of a complete breakfast in the sort of Kiki Jiki copy my value creatures style of deck. I wouldn't be surprised if if this shows up. I'm not gonna be shocked if it doesn't, but I think I don't know that it sounds attractive to me. Once you're in the business of how I copy this other thing, when it dies, I'm going to generate some value, or when it comes in, I'm going to generate some value. This gives you a little bit of redundancy where the saga doesn't always get you there.
Yeah, I will be surprised, but I've been surprised before. Professional Facebreaker. So 2/3 menace for 3 red, and this has whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, create a treasure and sack a treasure, and you can play the top card of your library this turn. I guess you exile the top card and then you can play it this turn. So this looks solid to me. Do you have any idea in particular where you thought you'd want this in particular?
Yeah, I'm wondering. I'm wondering at what point there's enough of the treasure stuff that it starts to play really nicely. You know, one treasure card leaves a treasure or two behind. The next treasure card comes and gives you the value. And I'm wondering whether that sort of linear type of strategy. I mean, I think to this point, some of the Goldspan Dragon shenanigans aside, treasures have been sort of something that shows up as part of your strategy, and maybe it ramps you to a different point in the curve, or maybe it sort of helps you do something like with Magda. Sometimes you can get a dragon or something. There's some cool things you can do, but it's sort of isolated. I don't think we've seen like the treasures is like I'm a treasures deck. I'm just wondering if a card like this, which really I think shows up at a pretty good rate, has multiple relevant abilities. It could even be part of like a mono red treasure strategy if there's payoffs for being mono red. I don't know. It asked that question of me, and as I sit here, I don't have the answer of whether the other treasure cards are going to pull you in that direction enough or give you enough payoff. But I think it's clearly sort of asking that question. Does it combine with the other treasure cards to do something that it feels meaningfully different than just like adding a treasure card to your deck?
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. The idea that this is, if this shows up, it's going to show up in an actual dedicated treasure deck, not a, I add this to my mono red deck, so I get a little bit of value as the game goes on. One thing, like the second ability, the when one or more creatures you control deals combat damage, it does work better if you have a mix of first strike and regular striking creatures, so you can get, double treasures, or like if you had a double strike creature, that would work too. So I don't know if there's any double striking creatures that would go in a treasure deck or something like that.
There's the double striking reconfigured creature that was I think a card that people probably were too high on last spoiler season.
Yeah.
But the mono red deck just didn't play out. It's possible this ends up suffering a similar fate where the red decks right now that do this sort of thing maybe just aren't. There's just not enough reason to do that instead of like playing runes or something. I mean, that's how it felt with the other red cards. So this might just be one more card in that binder. I'll have to wait for a rotation to shine, but I don't know. Just food for thought.
Yeah, this one definitely. This one, it feels like it's got a shot to me too. Gala Greeters. So this one thing that's interesting about this card is that it's an elf, which I've been playing a lot of elves in Alchemy, and this card slots perfectly into that deck. But I think the most interesting thing about this card is thinking about when do you put this in your deck versus when do you play Prosperous Innkeeper, because they look really similar, but I think they're functionally pretty different. I don't. Did you have a particular style of deck you think this is going to be good in, or?
No, I think that question you asked looms pretty large. Like, when is this going to be better or worse than Prosperous Innkeeper? I don't know exactly where it's going to go. I just thought that it gives you a rate that's kind of, you don't often see like the gain 2 life when another creature comes into play. Now, granted, you can only do that once a turn, but still, I mean, and you can choose between that and a treasure token. It can grow. It's sort of, I don't know. I just felt like there's so much going on there at the rate of just like being a 2-mana creature that it's at least interesting to me. It has some problems, most notably that it doesn't pass that test of like the immediate value test of, well, I put it out, my opponent uses removal, I'm not going to be just accepting a 1/1 there. This, you don't have that ability with this card because, I mean, it just requires you to put that extra creature in play next. So it might ultimately end up sort of behind the 8 ball in that way and worse than Prosperous Innkeeper, because Innkeeper sort of did this ramping thing that this doesn't do. That may be where it ends up. but it's at a rate where I want to at least understand what it does. If I just shove it into a Celestia deck, what's my experience there? That's what I want to try. That's why it showed up on my list of cards I want to try.
So I thought about this one a fair amount. There's a Pegasus that's a 2/1 flying trample that when it deals damage, if you've had two creatures come into play on your side, then it draws a card. So I think that this kind of is going to go in the same deck as that Pegasus, and there are a couple of really good ways to put multiple creatures into play. So I think Adeline is really strong with the Gala Greeters and that Pegasus, and Dasika's Chariot's really strong with them. So like both of those, like I think if you curve either this or the Pegasus into those cards, like it's you're going to be generating a lot of advantage very quickly.
That Pegasus didn't look like a playable card to me. I thought it was like a 2/1 creature for 2 has to be like have a lot of upside, and I didn't see it, but I can understand what you're saying, that those cards like that, it does sort of sound sort of interesting in that strategy. It's not that hard to make that part happen, but unfortunately it's a little bit hard to have the 2/1 sort of survive. But I guess it does have flying, and so it's not like it doesn't have the token, it doesn't get blocked by tokens all day, which some creatures have.
Yeah, it even has trample.
Yeah, it has trample. I'm still gonna be surprised if the 1 toughness creature that dies to everything ends up being like an attractive place to be. But again, with that Celestia type of strategy where you're like going wide and you have a bunch of things that make tokens and things that pay you off, like whatever, whether that's the card or not, I think I want to understand whether Gala Greeters fits in. Yeah. And I think it does it is sort of a natural fit in those types of strategies. So let's say you play this, then you play like the Adeline or whatever, you can get like a treasure token, and this becomes a 2/2. It's not overwhelming, but it could be good.
Yeah, the other thing about the Gala Greeters is I do think the gain 2 life specifically against the Ob Nixilis Punisher mechanic. I think if you played a turn 2 Gala Greeters and your opponent puts an Ob Nixilis into play, that you're like, assuming you're a deck that's built to make the Gala Greeters function, you're just going to be able to pay the Punisher cost on the Ob Nixilis for like 2 or 3 turns pretty comfortably. Or I guess take the drain. Maybe the Punisher cost is discarding. I don't know which side it is, but you're just going to gain life through the damage that the Ob Nixilis is dealing pretty comfortably with this card. So I think this might line up just well against Ob Nixilis, which will give it a spot.
Yeah, that's fair. And at the same time, you have this. It also might grow because you have 2 creatures come in, and then it's pressuring the Ob Nixilis. I think it's going to fit into that type of strategy. Again, I mean, like this format just is kind of about going wide enough of the time, and like you're like one of the most popular cards, like Wedding Announcement, right? I mean, like because you're already in this format so often headed in that direction, this has to be a card that you want to at least learn how good is it, how much of a payoff is there. If I curve this into a Wedding Announcement or an Adeline, how happy am I? We don't know yet. We haven't actually done that. But I think before all is said and done, we probably will have done that or seen it done. And so that'll be important to understand.
This is one I was interested in, Titan of Industry. So this is a 7-drop, but I think that this gives you enough that it is worth 7 mana. So you're going to get like a 7/7, a 4/4 and gain 5 life, or a 7/7, a 4/4 and kill an artifact, or you can protect your 7/7. Like you get to choose 2, and all 4 of those are good things. And it's got reach as well, so it blocks Goldspan Dragon. I think that this thing, you're actually getting enough for 7 mana that it's worth casting. You don't seem convinced.
Yeah, it looks like a fair deal. It looks like a fair exchange for 7 mana. You just have to get so much for 7 mana. Like maybe this is it. Yeah, I mean it's in that ballpark. It's mythic. It's pushed in terms of how much of each thing it's giving you, and I'm not gonna write it off. I just, again, when I sit down and build my green deck, if it's a little bit rampy, if it's the deck that's throwing a bunch of lands out, like yeah, I might reach for this. Again, though, I already find myself with a lot of things to do that cost even a little bit less. Even again, like I don't always get to fit all 4 copies of Ren and 6 in my decks that are playing in that style.
I think you mean
Um,
Ren and 7.
Sorry, Ren and 7. Thank you. Um, so compare this card to that card. I think I'd rather have the 5 mana effect. There's a Nissa that's competing with this. You just have competition as you get up the curve. Maybe this ends up being the best thing you could do around 5, 6, 7 mana, and you can play a few. I would sort of bet against though.
See,
I think that
I've never been happy with Ren and 7 if I wasn't trying to copy the Tree Folk with an Asika's Chariot.
mhm.
And I think that if you're not it like I only ever put Ren and 7 in my deck if I want to be playing 4 Asika's Chariots, and I think that maybe there's a way to build a green ramp deck where you don't feel like you need to play Asika's
Yeah.
Chariot, and you can just ramp to this, and then I would just not even bother with Ren and 7. But
Mhm.
like this is a 7 drop, so I mean that is a really big drawback. The one thing though is if it remains the case that like blue control decks are kind of pushed out of the format because they've been pushed out of the format now and they don't seem to be getting many new tools. One of the things that traditionally holds 7 drops back, especially 7 drops that have a ton of comes into play abilities, is they just get countered. And it doesn't seem like that this is that likely to get Disdainful Stroked just because people won't be playing with Disdainful Stroke. So this,
Possibly. Certainly, yeah. I don't expect a lot of the pure control, but I do expect some 3-color decks to. I expect
yeah,
that folks are going to try Grixis, and then those folks will have some Disable Stroke or something. So yeah, I agree. Like the climate right now, it's not like super. It's definitely not counterspell heavy. Um, but at the same time, someone still has to be thinking about what's my game plan against Goldspan Dragon. Again, I mean, we keep talking about some of these cards for a reason. I mean, these are
yeah.
some of the more popular, more powerful cards that almost got banned. Certainly, if you look at what got nerfed in Alchemy. So if you think about someone showing up to the tournament and thinking about, okay, what's my plan in my mid-range deck to sort of make sure that my opponent doesn't just cast Goldspan Dragon and protect it or whatever, and some of those cards that they choose are going to be cards that I think are going to be good against this.
Topiary Stomper. I think this is one you were interested in. This is one I was interested in to use to get to the
Yeah,
Titan of Industry.
yeah. I started thinking about it when you were talking about that Rampy deck because yeah, this was like a little reminiscent of the Beanstalk Giant, where you get your 3 mana ramp spell, which is a little bit below rate ramp, but you get a creature either in the exile zone or here like in this sort of quasi exile where it's on the battlefield but it can't yet attack or block. This has that sort of feel. Um, the payoffs for Beanstalk Giant I think were greater because you had the synergy with the adventure cards, and you had just a massive creature. But this is obviously lower investment because once you do it, you're done. Anyways, I think this might have it. There might be a role for this to play in the if that sort of ramping strategy ends up being good. Obviously, what you actually cast on the top end does matter. So we're certainly talking about this in the right part of the conversation. Is the 7 mana, 7/7, that type of thing, sort of what you had in mind when you're looking at this card, or was there other stuff that you think it might? It is any basic lands you could mana fix with it.
Yeah, I was brewing up a deck today that was like green black that was trying to get to the Titan of Industry, and I was using this and Binding of the Old Gods. One
Mm-hmm.
card that I think that works really well with the Stomper is Reckoner Bankbuster, because I think the Reckoner Bankbuster, you really wanted to have cards in your deck that are going to follow it up that can just crew it right away, which this obviously you can't attack or block with it, but you can crew the Bankbuster. And also just the fact that you're adding another land to the board means you're going to be more efficient at pulling the counters off the Bankbuster to get your cards back. So I think that's a pretty nice synergy. And also, because this is a 4/4, like you can sweep with Meat Hook Massacre, and on a lot of boards you're going to be able to keep your Topiary Stomper around. I think this card is going to show up a lot. I think it's pretty strong in any sort of big mana deck.
Yeah, it's smart. It's smart. Thinking about what can I do with this 4/4 buy that can't yet attack or block. I think crewing something is that's really creative. I could also imagine if there's a card that blinks things, then the fact that it has this thing that's in play that can't attack or block, but it would let you blink it. Now there may not be that card
Well,
right now.
no, teleportation circle is in standard right now, and I don't know that there's enough other stuff with it, but you can teleport that Titan of Industry too. If you start doing that, you're probably going to win.
Yeah. So and the teleport that card sort of functions like a Thrasa or whatever. That I'm not familiar with that card. I don't.
Oh, teleportation circle is just end step. You flicker a creature or an artifact, I think, but you definitely you flicker a creature.
Like a white and 3 or something. To put
yes.
Out? Yeah. Okay. Okay. So, anyways, is there a play? Is that playable? Are there other playable effects? I don't know, but that's the way to start thinking about what makes this different from the other ramp cards. And I think, but I like the idea of having it crew something, having it stick around after a sweeper, and then eventually you'll get to attack with it. Definitely things to think about.
Yeah. Workshop Warchief. So this is kind of like the new Thragtusk.
Yeah.
Seems
had to.
Fine.
I was so fond of Thragtusk when Thragtusk was out. I hate the Thragtusk was a little too powerful, but I won a PTQ with it. I liked it. I had to put this on my list just to say, okay, let's figure out, can we get some of those feels back? Yeah, I mean, things change. I mean, the fact that you don't get the creature when it gets bounced or exiled, or all the bad things that we've talked about happening to your shield creatures. It has some issues. Blitz is nice upside. So ultimately, if it ends up being an environment where life gain is at a premium because Nixilis is powerful, and I'm playing this green sort of rampy style deck, like the one that we've been talking about, and I find myself in these mid games a few life points short of being able to go over the top of Nixilis, I can imagine this being a card that can sort of get you where you're trying to go. But I think it is a card with more narrow applications than a Thragtusk was famously it was not narrow at all in its application. Yeah. This, I think, it does sort of have more of an interplay between, okay, well, how good is the life gain right now? Maybe because on this is better, maybe that kind of thing. It's not just a slam form in your deck and you're good to go.
Do you think you're going to mostly cast this for 5 mana or mostly want to blitz it for 6 mana?
I think mostly cast it for 5 mana, but if it was a different format and there was a bunch of control decks with Planeswalkers, my answer might be different, but I just don't think that this just isn't that format, I don't think.
Oh, you see, I was actually thinking that the Blitz might be the more popular way to use this card, but
yeah, maybe.
It's certainly it's really good to have the option, and I think that they're both pretty viable. So yeah, this doesn't look like the best card ever, but I think it might have a role. Moving on, Aven Heartstabber. So this is one we were both interested in. This is like a really, really poor man's version of Baleful Strix, I would say. Which is, you draw the card right away. But I do think that if you're looking to fill your graveyard, you're probably going to be interested in this card, I would say.
I would even broaden that a little bit to say it's doing a lot of what Black wants to be doing. I think the Black decks in this format enjoy putting a small creature out that has some death trigger and then finding a way to sack it. And Obnixis being one of them, but there's others. I mean, there's there are Kaito towards you for actually having the little evasion creature. It just does a lot of there's the one in a black, sacrifice a creature, make a treasure, draw 2 cards. I mean, was it Deadly Dispute? Is that the card?
Yes.
So those are some of the most powerful things I expect black decks to continue to want, and this I think will slot in pretty nicely. Sacking your creature that costs 2 mana, a little bit less attractive than sacking your thing that costs 1 mana, but in a long game, this eventually becoming a 3/3 flying death touch is definitely not something to ignore a card like the Channeler, a different 1/1 in the DRC that costs 1 red, and then eventually becomes 3/3. It just shows you that like something that plays one way in the first couple turns can become a real threat later if it has this type of text on it. So again, it's just doing a lot for not that much of an investment, and it's hard to interact with favorably for the opponent.
Yeah. So I was mostly interested in it in a reanimation deck, which I don't know if you've even looked at this card, Lord Xander the Collector. So it's a 6/6. When it comes out, they discard half their hand rounded down. When it attacks, you mill half their library rounded down. And when it dies, they sack half their permanents rounded down. But it doesn't have any evasion or real durability.
Non-land permanents, very meaningful.
Yes, that is very meaningful for sure. Do you think this reaches the bar that it's good enough to go through the hoops of trying to reanimate it?
I didn't think about it. I saw on the spoiler, I did enough of the mental math to conclude that it's not worth 7 mana to put it out. Rounding down is actually pretty painful, and hitting milling someone's library probably helps them more than hurts them. I did that. I didn't spend much time thinking about how to cheat it into play. Is this the thing I would even want to reanimate if I was in that business, or is there is that Jenga taxes better? I don't know. So I just haven't done that analysis, but it's possible. I mean, this is certainly a powerful card if it comes out on turn, 3, 4.
Wait, you can't do it on turn 3, I don't think, in standard.
So I start to get, I think because here's what I mean by when I'm thinking about when am I going to get the cheat into play, because the most powerful things it's doing are clear half my opponent's hand, rounded down, and rounded down again it is really meaningful because when the opponent has 5 cards, like this card 2 is a lot different than this card 3, so that really matters. Also, when that shows up also matters. So if it's like I'm ramming this on turn 4, turn 5, I don't know. I find it hard to believe that that's going to be good enough. This thing just gets chump blocked by a token, and you can't really mill someone out milling them half a library at a time because it's
I think if you, I think you probably, if you get 4 attacks and they get halved 4 times, even rounded down, you might actually deck them, but obviously that's not a very potent ability. The one thing I think this has going for it is I looked into this a lot. One of the ways you can reanimate something is with the Olivia, that's a 6 mana 3/4 haste that brings a creature from the graveyard to the battlefield attacking. And it has this clause that if the Olivia, that it reanimates the thing, but the thing dies if you stop controlling a legendary vampire. So most of the targets you can reanimate with Olivia. If you just kill the Olivia, the thing you reanimated, dies as well. But because this is a legendary vampire, this stays in play, which, that's something. I'm going to try that deck. I don't have super high hopes for it, but it's not like you're going to do anything else with this card. Certainly you should not put this in your deck planning to just wait till you have 7 mana to cast it.
Yeah, none of that stuff you just said sounds better than casting a Goldspan Dragon, but it might be fun to try, and maybe we'll be surprised.
Black Market Tycoon. So 2 mana, tap to make a treasure, and if you're not careful, you might take 2 damage sometime. It's very hard to take damage from this, I would say, unless for some reason you really need to build up 2 mana. This seems just like probably, better form of Lotus Cobra.
Yeah, I thought this card, it's a pretty powerful, it's just a pretty powerful rate. If you think of tap, create a treasure token, it's not hard. It's not, even if you just treat that as make a mana of any color, obviously that you have a card that's already almost playable, if not playable, and then the fact that you can actually bank it. Now it actually hurts you if you have other treasure cards. So this is sort of the opposite of the 2 you talked about, where you want to play a bunch of treasure cards. This one is not that card. This is more like, hey, I'm playing a Gruul beatdown deck. Can I slot this in and use it to ramp And I just think it's pretty good at that. You can get to 5 mana, using it. Anyways, like it's going to mitigate some of the like mana screw issues where you're like, just man, I really just want to get this Goldspan Dragon out there, but I didn't draw that extra land. Well, you can sort of bank one for a turn. But then the problem is again, like if I'm a Goldspan Dragon deck, can I really have a couple of these out there? Is that really what I want? And then I take 4 damage if I have a treasure out of my. I don't know. There's a give and take to it, so it's an interesting card. But I think it's at a power level where I think you're going to want to try to see how interesting it is and how it plays out.
I think it's going to be really hard for you to wind up taking damage you don't want to take with this thing in play, just because, like, obviously you can just sack the treasures whenever you make them. Even if you're playing the cards that make tapped treasure tokens, they're going to untap and you'll be able to sack them before this trigger resolves. So, like, if you have instants, like I think the part where it deals damage to you, that's only going to happen if you're trying to bank a treasure so you can ramp and get 2 extra mana on one turn.
Yeah.
So I think in general this is going to deal like 2 damage to you total in a game, would be my guess. Seems like a solid card to me.
Yeah.
Endless Detour. So this is kind of Ether Gust for anything.
Mm-hmm.
This looks like there's a lot of these 3 mana instants in the set that are like 3 mana of, one of each different colors. I think this is probably the best of them. Maybe Riveteer's Charm is better. But this looks like, just generally good card.
Yeah, it's good in a specific way that we've talked about. This is the one I think earlier. I thought Void Rend was exiled. I was probably thinking of this card actually. Yeah. But where you might make some choices to play this type of effect, get something off the battlefield without regard to the number of shield counters it has, where it's just it is sort of a safety valve on the shield mechanic. So that's interesting to me. And then just having the flexibility to target spells, and playing in a color combination, at least historically, that sort of is interested in playing a kind of tempo-oriented game some of the time. I mean, who knows if that's how it'll play out this time, because I think that these color combos have been maybe reconceptualized somewhat. But I don't know. I think it's interesting. It's flexible enough that it might be something that you want to reach for at 3 mana. It's in a set with other charms that are called charms, and then here we have like sort of a charmy type of card, but it's definitely it's among the more playable of the charmy type of cards in the set.
Yeah. The one thing, this card is a really good card to be able to cast with Leer, just because it's a pseudo counter that you can play when you have Leer in play. But I looked at it a little bit, and having a Bant Leer deck, I don't think is going to be functional. Just you don't get enough good instants and sorceries from green, or from white for that matter.
That makes sense.
Okay, so this is another one of these Blitz cards that looks pretty good to me. I don't know if you've looked at this one, Ziatora's Envoy.
Yeah, I have. I sort of informed my intuition by the fact that like the previous version of this, where you have to connect to get the value, pretty hard for those cards to work. What happens is you play it, and in the games where they don't have a board that lets them double block it, then they have a removal spell, and you end up kind of dissatisfied with the result, other than maybe a game that you were already that any 4 mana permanent would have won. That's my problem with it. Is this going to win me a game that a different 4 mana investment wouldn't have won? Now the Blitz thing, you're getting into a different way to invest mana, but I think the effects are somewhat similar. And in fact, like I think bigger blitzers are good at like knocking out planeswalkers if you don't actually get the ability to hit a planeswalker. So I'm down on this one personally.
This looked like one of the more interesting gold creatures to try to me, but it does have a lot of the same problems. Like I'm envisioning putting this in a deck where I'm already building my deck to try to cast a turn 3 Asika's Chariot. So this is just another permanent that is going to be really good if I can ramp it into play on turn 3. And
I just realized we didn't talk about the Chariot copying the Ob Nixilis. Sorry to derail you. Let's make sure we return to that for a moment. That's an interesting aspect of this format. But yeah, this card is going to be competing with cards like Chariot, and it's not going to. It's just going to be unlikely to win those different comparisons, in my view.
So one thing about this card is it's going to depend on what the removal in the format winds up being,
Sure.
because obviously if it's like it is now where Vanishing Verse stays really prevalent, you can't Vanishing Verse this. You can't abrade it. Like it lives through a lot of the possible 2-mana removal spells people might actually play, which might make it a little bit more appealing. But I think if I had to guess, you're probably right that it's just, you can't put a 4-mana card like this in your deck because it just dies to removal too often.
Yeah. We'll see. I think
Yeah.
it's interesting that dynamic about Vanishing Verse in particular, that sometimes you are looking for something, if that card ends up being still as big as it is now. Yeah, you are sometimes looking to either have all your sort of higher end cards have that feel, but yeah, I don't know that this is where you want to go.
Yeah. And this was the one final card that I was somewhat interested in, which I think you're not going to be interested in it at all. So this is, really pretty bad against removal, but I do think that the trigger on this card is fairly powerful. The ability to sack something and then you deal some damage and you get 3 treasures. In particular because of Riveteer's Charm. So you're just going to be able to cast your Riveteer's Charm the same turn you play this card. Assume you get to your instep, which that was somewhat appealing to me. I don't know.
Riveteer's Charm to remind myself what that one does.
So that's the one. It's Soul Shatter, or you can exile your top 3 and you can play them till your next instep.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, this has, I think this is, it has a few sort of famous problems. It doesn't. Removal is going to get a clean 1/1, even though you put 6 mana in, whether it's a counter or a Doomblade, you're out. And then when you have a spell that sort of ramps in some sense, having your 6 mana spell ramp. I mean, what kind of curve do you really have in this deck? Sometimes you've expended all your cheap stuff and you don't have any more expensive stuff. So that's why I didn't have it on my list. But on the other hand, I certainly expect a Jund deck in this format to be interested in sacrificing creatures and to have things out to sacrifice, and the effect does register with me as powerful in terms of flinging things at people, and at the same time you're making treasure tokens and maybe interact with what the opponent's doing. So, I'm not maybe as down as you would have predicted, although you would easily be able to predict that I identify those problems that are inherent in some of the 6 and 7 mana cards that don't win you the game on the spot if they're unchecked necessarily. This one maybe does, though. Maybe it does at least pass that test, because I'm saying I'm putting 6 mana into something. I need to get that value back right away, where I'm not heartbroken if they remove it. But at least I'm going to win the game if they don't remove it. I mean, that's really what it has to do in with the way the cards are today. So you're basically telling me you think that this will actually satisfy that second condition often enough, right? You're saying that you believe this probably does win you the game a high percent of the time they don't kill it. Am I getting you there?
Well, yeah, I guess I would say that, but also I think this is kind of like in an in-between state for the dies to removal argument, because it almost has haste in the sense that, if they're going to remove it with the sorcery speed effect, you are going to get the first fling from it.
Mm-hmm.
So, you're going to get a fair that's like a spell's worth of value for sure. Just getting to play a fling and put 3 treasures into play, that's probably worth more than a spell.
Yeah.
On a lot of boards. So it kind of draws a card unless it dies before you get to your instep.
Yeah, that's true.
Most of the time. So there's a little bit of hope. It does have the same problem that any 5 or 6 mana card that you're going to be putting in a red deck has, where it's you could have just played a Goldspan Dragon instead.
Yeah.
Is it really worth trying to do something different? And I want to try the different things to see.
Yeah.
But
maybe it's the dedicated treasures thing Um, maybe it's so meaning that you're going to play both, this um, and
Yeah,
the gold standard.
that's a lot of expensive cards, but maybe.
Could you put one of them in your deck to tutor up with Magda? Yeah, wouldn't like shock me if that's something that you want to do. Again, in that treasure strategy. So like, if my goal is to go hard on treasures and Magda becomes one of my most important cards, well, do I want this as part of my toolkit? Maybe.
Well,
You
this
know.
also is just, I guess if you're a Magda deck, and if you build up a couple treasures and then you just play this and you have this Magda and one other thing to sack, you can then go and just get a second dragon immediately.
Yeah.
So
That
in that sense, I mean, it might make it just so your opponent cannot come back. If
that I mean that sounds like the most fertile space
yeah,
to explore to me with this card. It's like I've got treasures, I've got Magda. This is good on both sides of the Magda exchange.
yeah.
That sounds pretty reasonable.
All right. Well, those were all the cards I was interested in, and I don't know if there's anything you were interested in,
No,
but
you were very gracious in letting me get to all the ones on my list as we got through these. I
yeah.
did want to make sure we circle back really quickly to the chariot, copying the Nixilis in a Jund deck. Um, if I'm a Jund deck already, and those are cards that I think are powerful, and they happen to interact in that way, again, that's something you have to have your eye on. I think we'll see. We'll see where the proper home for these cards is, and whether those cards end up having the same home. But I thought that in the rules, if you haven't heard, if you haven't read sort of these, there's no way of knowing from reading the cards really that whether you'll be able to copy a planeswalker and get loyalty. But it turns out you do get the amount of loyalty equal to X. When you made the copy, it has this loyalty X from what you sacrifice, and that's the same loyalty you'll get when you copy that copy with the chariot. So a little bit of rules,
So if you're
quirkiness.
playing in paper, you just need to remember the loyalty that all of your copies came into play with.
I suppose you would, yeah. The whole thing seems like a nightmare on paper. I mean, you have to be tracking loyalty on both the planeswalkers. One of which might be like slip of paper or or a sleeve, something token. I presume you're not gonna. I mean, maybe they'll have the Obnixus token, maybe not. Yeah, it seems like a little bit of a tracking nightmare in paper already. And then when I've got four of them out, my chariot, yeah, it's gonna be interesting.
Yeah, also just tracking which ones have been used. I guess people would probably notice. I think I'm just going to remember that all of my copies came into play with 7 loyalty. And,
Yeah,
if my opponent doesn't remember different, they're really not going to win.
yeah, and, if you can Obnix list sack a 7 power creature that you've already used to crew the chariot, hit him with the chariot. Is there any like I wonder what's the like cheapest way to put a 7 power just thing out that maybe it can tap, or maybe is there anything like
Well,
that?
so there is the new Death Shadow in the set that is a 7/7.
Mhm.
That you what you do is you plus a Sorin. It reveals that Death Shadow thing. So right away you take I think 15.
15.
So then your next turn your Death Shadow is ready to go. I think realistically the easiest way to get a 7/7 in one of these decks is just a Ren and 7 token. Because
Mm.
if you're already a Nasika's Chariot deck, like you don't
Oh,
mind
okay.
having Ren and 7. I don't know at that point that you really like do you need to do this up next list thing to win if you're copying seven
Yeah,
seven tokens, but
you kind of got a stew going though. The cards kind of work together at least. Yeah, that I can connect those dots. You mentioned that we might as well talk about that Death Shadow card. It wasn't on our list. It's interesting. I think the most powerful part of that card is that it costs 15 mana in terms of the mana value of the card. So that in the next set, if there's something like an erratic explosion type effect, where it's like, hey, discard a card, and you can deal damage to a player equal to its casting mana value, they don't make that card very often anymore. But if they do, that's I think actually like the most powerful, so to speak, aspect of that card. I don't think it's going to be very good the way as intended. Potentially, you know what I mean? Like just sort of putting a 7/7 out there, it just doesn't seem that attractive. that way, but keep an eye out for things that let you discard it and go to the dome.
Oh, I thought the most powerful thing was that combo I pointed out with Soren, where you could just deal 15 to yourself.
Yes, that type of thing, but it's just slightly different.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's probably a good point to end it on. To don't try to Soren for that Death Shadow, I think is the conclusion. But yeah, thanks for coming on again, and it was great to have you. And hopefully, this gets people excited about a wider variety of cards in Streets of New Capenna. Uh,
Yeah.
it's a set that to me has like a really flat power level, with the
Mm.
exception of Ob Nixilis. So there's honestly there's a bunch of cards we didn't even touch on that I think maybe have a shot, and maybe have an equal shot to a lot of the cards we did touch on. But I think this is going to be a really good set for exploring like a wide variety of decks.
Yeah. Last piece of advice, and thanks for having me on. When the standard is really big, like it is now, it tends to favor some of the synergistic cards that work with other cards, not just like the thing that just looks like on its own. It's like it's got doing something slightly cheaper or whatever. Because there's so many different cards. Like I think like some of the Magda stuff we talked about with the treasures. I mean, like that's the kind of thing that I think that could make some of these cards more powerful than they appear on the spoilers. I don't know. Keep an eye out for that. If you're looking at which cards to try out first, I know from my perspective, I'm going to maybe try to pull up some of those cards. I think Obnixilus just stands out as both a card that's good on sort of rate and also a card that you can find a way to combine it with a few other things to make it pop. So obviously, I think everyone's going to be trying that card. But anyways, it's gonna be a big standard, and it's hard for the last set to make a splash sometimes. But I think it lets some of the synergies maybe stand out.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everybody for watching, and I'll catch you next time.